Good morning, everyone. Happy August 9th. It's hard to believe that we're over halfway through summer vacation already. I can tell you, as a parent of two small children, that this is the longest summer vacation in history. We are looking so forward to developing new normal and getting back to life. It's been a long 5 months, and it's time. It's time to get things underway and see what life's going to hand us. This morning, I'm joining you guys from my deck. It's quiet. Everybody's in bed still. Chuck's gone to work. And this is one of my favorite times of the day. Just sitting here by myself, a cup of coffee. And this morning, I've got my children's Bible. And that's what I'm going to read to you guys from. And we're going to read from the book of Matthew. And Matthew is in the New Testament. And we're going to read Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. And this passage is called Jesus Walks on the Water. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he became afraid and began to sink, and cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And then they climbed into the boat. The wind died down. Those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And my little bit of a takeaway from this is that at these times, we do not need to be afraid. We have Jesus with us, and we're going to cross these waters that are torrenting and crazy. You might want to call them the COVID waters, but we're going to get over that, and we're going to come together. And we're going to be together as a church family again. And life's going to carry on. And we're going to be safe. And we're going to make sure that we have all the precautions in place to keep each and every one of you safe as we join together again. It's going to be so good to see everybody. And we can't wait. Take care.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is our last virtual worship for a couple of weeks while we try out our soft launch and see how it goes. We're going to get back into worship together on August the 16th, the same time, 10:45. We'll see you inside the church. Bring your mask. Or if you feel safer outside, you can sit in your car and still listen to the service. But either way, we are looking forward to seeing you. I once did a 4-month interim pastorate at Lower Granville while the minister was on leave. That was a 4-point charge, which included Victoria Beach. I loved driving down there. You'd drive along, and suddenly you'd come upon this astonishing vista of shining waters moving in the deep rhythms of the ocean. It was awe-inspiring always, and I would always think, oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus as the ocean rolled. The tiny scallop boats would be out there bobbing along, and I soon learned, as I was invited into people's homes, that the residents knew exactly whose boats they were. And I also learned that the peril of the sea is not ancient history. In fact, there had been a drowning of a young man in one of those little fishing boats just the year before I came. Young men going down to the sea in their boats. See, the sea is not only beautiful, it is dangerous. In Jesus' day, The sea was not just ordinarily dangerous as we would think of it. It was a symbol of everything that was threatening and dangerous and evil. The sea was the home of deep darkness and unknown monsters and demons. The Psalms are full of references to these monsters, and always it was God, Yahweh, as the Hebrews called him, who walked on the waters and defeated the monsters. When Jesus walked on water in the story Pam read for us today, thank you very much, Pam, for reading today. The wonder was not that Jesus was walking on water. The wonder was that he was triumphing over the forces of evil and chaos, which pointed to his true identity. Look at the creation story in Genesis, where the wind of God, the Spirit of God, sweeps over the water, and God imposes order on the darkness and chaos of the deeps. The creative power of God is seen as the power to subdue that great swirling chaos of disorder that evil can bring about. So when Jesus walks on the water, he's making a claim about his identity. On this night, the story we have, the disciples had been fishing, and they found themselves battling a headwind that kept blowing them back from shore, and they were unable to dock their boats or beach their boats on the shore. They couldn't get to safety, and they were afraid. It's a very frightening experience. Sometimes our inner life is just like that. We've all known monsters of the deep, this deep. Thoughts and confusions and impulses that find a way into the most innocent and well-intentioned lives. And sadly, some who battle these destructive forces inside their own souls do drown in these waves. We hear all the time teachers, team coaches, clergy, youth workers, coaches, famous actors, all people who are considered to hold public trust have shocked us time and time again when we have the shattering news that these beloved people are not who they seem to be, that they have violated trust, stolen money, worse, stolen innocence, or ruined lives and destroyed lives for other people because they could not deal with their own inner chaos. We're all subject to what the theologians used to call original sin, which means that none of us is perfect and all of us come short of the glory of God, no matter how earnestly we seek to serve God through Christ. All of us have things to regret and things to confess, all of us. But some of us are in the grip of a true inner storm, the kind of chaos that threatens to bury us in that tumult. You know, there's a reason for that old saying, between the devil and the deep blue sea. For others, though, the inner chaos doesn't come from these dark impulses. It comes from fear. We are all so afraid of so much, and for some that fear can be painfully paralyzing. We live in a fearful age. We are, of course, afraid of death. Our own mortality is the unthinkable that we just, therefore, don't think about much. We don't want to lose. We're terrified of loss. We don't want to lose our place. We don't want to lose those we love. We don't want to lose the things we treasure or the affection and respect of those around us. We're afraid of loss. We're afraid of death. We're afraid of pain. Torture is so effective because human beings are afraid of pain. We're afraid of being alone in the dark, in that dark. We're afraid of being sick. We're afraid of flying. We're afraid of heights. We're afraid of spiders and snakes and mice and boogeymen that are real and boogeymen that are imaginary. Some of our fears, that is, are realistic and save our lives, and we should have them. Don't go into dark alleys at night. Some of our fears are just unrealistic. Some are phobias from which we need release. Well, humanity, we like to think of ourselves as the species that has some kind of rational edge on every other species. And so we tend to define ourselves as humanity by our rational powers. But the truth is, we are motivated as much by our fears and our impulses as by our rational powers. But fears especially. That's how things like the Salem witch trials in Massachusetts in 1692 took hold. A terrible tragedy. People at that time were so afraid of the devil. They were settling in this new land that they'd seized from the indigenous people. There were lots of things that they were afraid of, forest and dark and animals and everything. But they were afraid of the devil, and they got so caught up in that fear that they began to see him everywhere, in their neighbors even. And that suspicion turned into whispers, which turned into spoken accusations, which turned into public trials, which turned into terrible executions of perfectly innocent people of the sin of witchcraft. Fear can save your life, but community fear can be a dangerous thing sometimes. Use your rational part always when you sense that coming. No matter how civilized, this is what I'm trying to say is that no matter how civilized or educated or rational or reasonable you and I might be, there are some times when we all experience this raw, gut-churning chaos inside. There are times when we have expressions like, my heart sank, or we say, it's enough to make you puke. We all know the feeling of being in the boat, as the disciples were that night, and just knowing that any minute now something really, really bad is going to happen to you. So all of that being said, it is so hard for us to believe that in the place of monsters, in the place of fear, God could be present. We tend to think that God is most around in the sweetness and the blessings, and we're not expecting Jesus to show up in the goblins and the snarling beasts that are having at us. And yet, the scriptures show again and again that is exactly when Jesus comes to meet us. In today's scripture, when the disciples realized that it's not a ghost out there, not a fearful being walking on the water, but it's Jesus, their master, and they are overcome. Then Jesus does something incredible. He tells Peter, who has absolutely no godly divine power whatsoever, he tells Peter to step out of the boat and to walk on the water, just like he was doing. He tells Peter, you too can triumph over this storm. Well, if you were Peter, what would you do? Would you get out of the boat? And if you were one of the other disciples, what would you be telling Peter? Would you be cheering him on? Would you be saying, as the waves were crashing around you and the wind was howling, would you say, for heaven's sake, Peter, stay put. Don't be a fool. What would you do if you had to get out of the boat? Do you trust that Jesus is there to keep you from falling? Sometimes he really is. A story is told of a young executive, and I'll tell it as best I can. I found it somewhere in my collection, so I would give credit if I knew to whom to give credit. But it's a story of a young executive who was so ill with meningitis that the doctor told the family that he was probably not going to live, and called the family together and said, indeed, if he did live, he would most certainly be permanently brain damaged. But just at the threshold of death, this man recovered, and he had this story to tell, and it was a very startling story. His story is that while he was unconscious and the whole church was praying, there was much more going on within him than his sweating, feverish body would reveal. And these are his own words. While I was in the coma, it was one long scene as though I was watching a movie. I was sitting in the back of the church on a hot summer day, and I was fanning myself with a bulletin, sweating and wishing for a glass of ice water. Everything was kind of cloudy, shimmering. There was a phone booth in the middle of the aisle, and people were lined up waiting to talk. They would go in and talk to someone and then come out again. And I got in line and I was waiting my turn. It seemed to take forever. Finally, my turn came. And when I went into the booth, I looked up and I couldn't see the top. The phone booth went up through the roof of the church, up through the clouds and into the heavens, and I couldn't see where. I picked up the phone to talk. And then I looked up again, and I can't describe what I saw. It was simply awesome. It was as though I was seeing God, but I really couldn't see. I get goosebumps just thinking about it, he said. I shook inside and out, and then I hung up the phone and went back to my seat. And I just sat there with a sense of astonishment and wonder. And finally it got cool. There was a nice breeze, and it wasn't so bad anymore. And then I woke up, and Gretchen, that's his wife, and he was telling the story to the pastor, were standing there. In the end, the story goes, this man suffered only a 5% hearing loss in one ear. That's how miraculous his recovery was. He and many people who prayed for him, maybe that was the symbolism of lining up at the telephone booth. Everyone was awestruck at this outcome. His neurologist said simply, it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things I can't explain. Sometimes we can't explain the wonder of God working in our lives, however that work happens. In this story, the executive was transformed from a casual churchgoer to a person of great faith. Whatever your story, whatever happens to you or has happened to you in your time of great fear, the good news or the gospel is that God does have a way of showing up at the very times we least imagine it is even possible. God is indeed, as the story of the cross itself shows us, most likely to show up, not when we're serenely sailing on those smooth, shining seas, but when our hearts are sinking and we're convinced that there's no longer any hope of our physical or spiritual or emotional survival. Suddenly you look up and you can hardly believe your eyes. There he is. His name is Jesus, and he is walking toward you, just ignoring the waves as though this scary and powerful force was nothing at all. And he's putting out his hand to you and he's saying, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's I, Jesus. I'm here. Because this too is the gospel. Once the incredible love and power and compassionate healing of Jesus Christ is made known to you, you are called upon to respond. That's the next thing. Jesus tells you, get up and take the risk. He told Peter, get up out of the boat, take my hand, get up and take the risk. The chaos and darkness that you think is going to destroy you will not, because I am here and I am with you. And I will never forsake you, never abandon you, never leave you for the monsters to devour. I'm with you. Don't be afraid. It is I. So take that step out of the boat. Take that step. Go to the Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous meeting. Just go. Make an appointment with a counselor to talk about the traumas that are haunting you. Just go. Talk to someone about the family conflicts that are eating you up or the anxieties that are paralyzing you with fear. Just go. Fill out that application for a job that might give you life and take you away from a workplace that is killing you. Just go. As John Lewis, the great civil rights worker who just died, used to say, if you see something, go. Do something or say something. Just go. Step aside from the daily madness and spend a weekend in prayer. We don't spend enough time in quiet. We don't even know what to do with quiet. Just take some time to be quiet. Just go. Take the step God offers to you. If only you could see the presence of God in your options. We all have a little faith. Every one of us have a little faith, whether we think we do or not. Jesus calls us to dig deep and find that and promises to enlarge it. It's safe, he told Peter, to step out of the boat. Just go. Someone is waiting to catch you. Or maybe the other way to flip this and think about it, maybe you're the one to catch someone else when they fall. Jesus said to Peter and says to us, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. I'm with you. Just go. I see you next week in the sanctuary or in the parking lot, I hope. And if not, know that we'll be praying for you and thinking about you, those of you who are not able to come. Bless you all. Bye.